The crystalline ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars made of pure light, their forms shifting between geometric configurations that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could properly process. Ambassador Zephyra stood at the viewport of her flagship, the Luminary of Progress. Watching the primitive blue world grow larger beneath them, her translucent form pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed amusement to her crew. Another backward planet, another species, that would need the hegemony's guidance to achieve true civilization. Preliminary scans complete, Ambassador, reported Science Coordinator Vexani, her harmonics carrying the musical undertones that indicated scientific satisfaction. Population, approximately 7.8 billion carbon-based bipeds. Technology level, ... fascinating. They appear to be in their early atomic age, with primitive chemical propulsion for space travel and basic nuclear fission capabilities. Zephyra's crystalline form brightened with what her species considered benevolent condescension. In her 3 centuries of service to the hegemony of enlightened worlds, she had encountered dozens of primitive species. They always followed the same pattern: chaotic political structures, destructive tendencies, and technology that barely qualified as science by galactic standards. Any signs of quantum manipulation or gravity control, she asked, though she already knew the answer. None whatsoever, Vexani replied, her harmonic frequency carrying notes of academic pity. They're still using controlled explosions to achieve orbital velocity. Their most advanced vessels appear to be simple metal, constructs powered by chemical reactions. It's almost ... quaint. Through the viewport, Zephyra could see the scattered debris that humans laughably called their International Space Station, a collection of metal tubes held together with mechanical joints that looked like something a child might build, with primitive construction toys. Below them, the planet's surface showed the chaotic patchwork typical of pre-unification civilizations, hundreds of political boundaries, scattered urban centers connected by crude transportation networks, and energy production methods that still relied on burning organic compounds. Communications, incoming ambassador, announced Navigation Coordinator Luxera from her position at the crystalline interface that served as their communication array. Multiple transmission sources across the planet. They appear to be attempting contact through electromagnetic radiation. Zephyra's form pulsed with gentle amusement. Electromagnetic radiation, the same primitive communication method that the hegemony had abandoned over a millennium ago in favor of quantum entanglement arrays and harmonic resonance networks. It was like watching cave dwellers try to signal with smoke fires, activate translation protocols, and accept their transmissions, she commanded. Let's see what these young ones have to say. The main display materialized in the center of the command chamber, showing a collection of human faces that represented what their species apparently considered leadership. Zephyra noted their crude clothing-woven fibers and synthetic materials, rather than the adaptive biotextiles used by civilized species. Their faces showed the stress patterns typical of primitive beings, who hadn't yet learned to regulate their emotional responses through proper neural enhancement. Human female with graying hair and primitive optical correction devices stepped forward from the group. This is Secretary General Maria Santos of the United Nations, representing the people of Earth. We welcome you to our world and hope that we can establish peaceful communication between our species. Zelf crew exchanged harmonic frequencies that conveyed polite bewilderment. The human was speaking as if her fragmented political organization could somehow represent an entire planet. A level of presumption. That would have been amusing if it weren't so tragically naive. Greetings, young ones, Zephyra replied. Voice carried through translation matrices that converted her harmonic language into the crude, sound-based communication that humans used. I am Ambassador Zephyra of the hegemony of enlightened worlds, representing over 14,000 advanced civilizations across this galaxy. We have come to welcome Earth into the greater community of intelligent species. The humans exchanged glances that their primitive facial expressions suggested were hopeful. Secretary General Santos stepped forward again, her posture displaying the kind of eager anticipation that Zephyra had seen countless times before. This is an historic moment for humanity, Santos said, her voice carrying emotional fluctuations that indicated poor psychological control. We've dreamed of this day for generations. What does membership in your hegemony require from us? Zalthera's form brightened with what she considered kindly patience. These primitive beings actually thought they could join the hegemony, as equals it was almost endearing in its innocence. She activated her personal display, showing holographic representations of the galaxy's advanced civilizations to help the humans understand their place in the cosmic order. The hegemony exists to guide younger species toward enlightenment, she explained, her tone carrying the same gentle authority she might use with particularly slow children. We've observed your world for some time, and while your species shows potential, you are clearly not ready for true galactic citizenship. The human's facial expressions shifted to patterns that suggested confusion and growing concern. Secretary General Santos spoke carefully, as if afraid of giving offense. What do you mean by not ready? We've achieved spaceflight, nuclear energy, global communications, charming attempts at civilization. Zalthera agreed with harmonic warmth. But observe the evidence of your current limitations. The holographic display shifted to show Earth from orbit, highlighting the chaotic political boundaries that carved the planet into hundreds of separate territories. You have not achieved planetary unification, a basic requirement for civilized species. Your political structures remain fragmented and competitive rather than cooperative and efficient. The display zoomed in on human military installations, showing primitive weapons systems and crude defensive positions. Your technology remains focused on internal conflict rather than constructive development. These nuclear weapons you've developed represent the kind of self-destructive thinking that prevents species from advancing beyond their home systems. A human male with elaborate clothing that suggested leadership status stepped forward. With respect, Ambassador, humanity has made remarkable progress in recent decades. We've established international cooperation, space exploration programs, global communication networks. Zalthera's harmonic laughter was carefully modulated to convey benevolent amusement rather than mockery. Your international cooperation consists of temporary agreements between competing power structures. Your space exploration has managed to place a handful of individuals in low planetary orbit using technology that our ancestors abandoned before achieving interstellar travel. Your global communications rely on electromagnetic radiation transmitted through crude mechanical devices. She gestured to her ship's crystalline walls, which pulsed with data streams that traveled faster than light itself. True civilization requires unified purpose, sustainable technology, and communication methods that transcend the limitations of primitive physics. Your species demonstrates emotional instability, territorial aggression, and scientific approaches that barely qualify. As organized inquiry, Secretary General Santos's expression showed the kind of determined optimism that Zalthera had learned to recognize in primitive species. Perhaps you could help us advance, share your knowledge, guide our development toward the standards you've described. Indeed, Zalthera replied, her form brightening with the satisfaction of a problem neatly solved. The hegemony has extensive experience in managing primitive species transition. We have identified several suitable worlds where humanity can be relocated while you undergo the centuries of development necessary to achieve civilized status. The translation matrices carried the sudden shift in human emotional patterns confusion, giving way to alarm as they processed the implications of her words. Secretary General Santos spoke with vocal frequencies that indicated rising stress. Relocated. You mean ... leaving Earth. Naturally, Zalthera explained with the patience of someone addressing an obvious point, Earth possesses resources that are needed for more advanced purposes. The third planet of any system is typically optimal for quantum crystal cultivation and gravitational research installations. Your species will be much more comfortable on worlds specifically prepared for primitive biological needs. The humans began exchanging rapid communications in their crude spoken language, their facial expressions and body movements displaying the kind of chaotic emotional responses that confirmed Zalthera's assessment of their developmental status. She waited patiently while they processed the reality of their situation. Ambassador Secretary General Santos finally said, her voice carrying harmonics that the translation matrix identified as barely controlled fear, humanity has lived on Earth for our entire evolutionary history. This is our home. Surely some arrangement could be made. Zalthara's form pulsed with sympathetic understanding. Your emotional attachment to your birth world is completely natural for primitive species. But consider the benefits. Worlds with optimal atmospheric composition, carefully managed ecosystems, free from the ecological damage you've inflicted here, and most importantly, guidance from advanced civilizations who can help you develop beyond your current limitations. She activated another display showing pastoral scenes from the hegemony's primitive species, reservations carefully maintained, environments where younger races could develop at their own pace under benevolent supervision. You'll have access to basic education, sustainable resource allocation, and protection from the kinds of conflicts that currently plague your world. No more wars, no more environmental destruction, no more technological dead ends. The human leadership group had begun what appeared to be urgent consultations, their primitive vocal communication creating a chaos of overlapping sound that demonstrated their species' inability to achieve proper collective consciousness. Found their behavior both predictable and slightly sad. They were responding exactly as every primitive species did when confronted with the reality of their limitations. The hegemony is prepared to begin relocation procedures immediately, she announced when their discussions had reached what appeared to be exhaustion rather than resolution. Our transport vessels can accommodate your entire population within 30 standard rotations. This timeline will allow you to gather essential cultural artifacts and complete basic preparations for your transition to civilized guidance. Secretary General Santos looked up from her consultations with an expression that the translation matrix identified as desperate determination. Ambassador, we need time to discuss this with our people. This is a decision that affects every human being on Earth. Naturally, Zalthara agreed graciously. 30 rotations should provide adequate time for your species to accept the inevitable. The hegemony looks forward to welcoming humanity into proper galactic civilization. As the communication ended and the human faces faded from the display, Zalthara turned to her crew with harmonic patterns that conveyed satisfied completion of routine duties. Another primitive species, another successful application of standard hegemony protocols. Within a month, Earth would be cleared for productive use, while its former inhabitants began their long journey toward actual civilization. Of knowing that the humans had been listening to the hegemony's communications for over 60 years, or that their primitive technology included capabilities that her advanced civilization had never imagined possible. The luminary of progress established a high orbital position above Earth's northern hemisphere, its crystalline hull refracting sunlight into prismatic displays that could be seen from the planet's surface. Ambassador Zalthara had activated the hegemony's standard primitive species management protocol, well-tested procedure refined through contact with hundreds of younger civilizations across the galaxy. Begin comprehensive resource cataloging, she instructed Science Coordinator Vexani, her harmonic voice carrying the casual authority of someone performing routine administrative tasks. Standard extraction analysis for class M worlds. I want detailed assessments of mineral deposits, atmospheric composition, and ecosystem biodiversity. Vexani's crystalline form pulsed with efficient compliance as she interfaced with the ship's quantum scanning arrays. Initial surveys indicate exceptional resource density. Ambassador, rare earth elements in concentrations 50% above galactic averages. The third planet's magnetic field creates ideal conditions for quantum crystal cultivation. Estimated extraction timeframe 47 standard cycles for complete resource optimization. Excellent, Zalthara replied, already composing her preliminary report to the Hegemony Council. Earth would provide materials for at least a dozen major construction projects, while its relocated inhabitants began their centuries-long journey toward actual civilization. It was a perfect example of the hegemony's benevolent efficiency, transforming a chaotic, primitive world into a productive component of galactic civilization. Meanwhile, Security Coordinator Thralix had begun deploying what the hegemony considered adequate protection for a primitive world management operation. 3 light patrol vessels took positions around Earth's major population centers, their crews treating the assignment as a routine security exercise rather than potential military engagement. Human military capabilities assessed reported his harmonic frequency, carrying notes of barely concealed amusement. Kinetic projectile weapons, chemical explosives, primitive atomic fission devices. Maximum effective range, approximately 50 kilometers above planetary surface. Threat level to hegemony vessels, negligible. Through the luminary's quantum sensors, the crew observed human military responses with the kind of academic interest typically reserved for studying primitive tribal warfare. Military bases across Earth had increased their activity levels, but their preparations seemed laughably inadequate to beings accustomed to energy, weapons, and gravitational manipulation technology. Look at this navigation coordinator. Highlighted a section of Earth's surface where human aircraft were gathering in large formations. They appear to be organizing their atmospheric vehicles into defensive positions. Metal constructs powered by controlled hydrocarbon combustion, armed with kinetic projectiles. It's like watching children prepare to fight adults with wooden sticks. The hegemony ship's defensive systems operated automatically, generating energy. Barriers that could deflect asteroid impacts or absorb the output of small stars. Human weapons couldn't penetrate their shields even if fired continuously for decades. The fact that made the humans' military preparations seem both pathetic and endearing. Ambassador Zephyra activated the communication array to address the primitive world's leadership. Her intent to begin the educational process that would help humanity understand their situation more clearly. People of Earth, she began, her harmonically translated voice carrying across every human communication network simultaneously. The hegemony wishes to address concerns that may have arisen regarding your species' relocation. We understand that primitive civilizations often experience anxiety when confronted with the reality of their limitations. The response came from multiple human sources. Their fragmented political structure, creating a chaos of overlapping communications that confirmed everything the hegemony knew about pre-unification, species psychology. Secretary General Santos appeared to be attempting coordination among the various human factions, but her efforts demonstrated the kind of inefficient consensus building that made primitive democracy such an evolutionary dead end. Ambassador Zephyra Santos said, her vocal patterns indicating carefully controlled stress. Humanity has united in requesting additional time to consider your ... proposal. We believe that with proper communication, we might find alternatives. To complete relocation, Zephyra's crew exchanged harmonic frequencies that conveyed polite bewilderment. The humans were still operating under the delusion that they could negotiate as equals rather than accept guidance from their superiors. It was a common psychological response among primitive species, the inability to recognize their own limitations, leading to unrealistic expectations about their position in galactic civilization. Young ones, Zephyra replied with the patient tone she reserved for particularly slow children. The hegemony's decisions are based on comprehensive analysis of galactic optimization requirements. Earth's resources are needed for projects that benefit trillions of advanced beings across hundreds of star systems. Your species' attachment to this single world, while emotionally understandable, cannot override the greater good of galactic civilization. She activated a holographic display showing the scope of hegemony territory, thousands of star systems connected by quantum transportation networks, massive engineering projects that reshaped entire solar systems and populations of advanced beings whose technological capabilities made human achievements seem like crude cave paintings. Observe the scale of true civilization, she continued. The hegemony maintains 17 ring worlds, each capable of supporting populations larger than your entire species. We've constructed artificial stars to power research installations, created pocket dimensions for advanced manufacturing, and established communication networks that span galactic clusters. Your species' contribution to this greater purpose will be invaluable once you've undergone proper development. The human military preparations continued during these communications, but their activities only reinforced hegemony assessments. Of primitive species psychology, humans were gathering their most advanced weapons in defensive positions around major cities, apparently believing that metal projectiles and chemical explosives could somehow threaten vessels protected by energy. Barriers capable of deflecting solar flares. Their behavior follows predicted patterns exactly, observed science coordinator Vexani as she monitored human activities through quantum surveillance arrays. Tribal defensive responses, emotional decision-making, and complete inability to assess actual threat levels. Standard primitive species psychology texts could be written based on their reactions. Security coordinator Throlix had begun what the hegemony called demonstration protocols, mild displays of technological superiority designed to help primitive species understand the futility of resistance. His patrol vessels activated their gravitational manipulation systems, gently moving Earth's artificial satellites into new orbital positions, while demonstrating their complete control over the local space environment. Human spacecraft deactivated, he reported with satisfaction. Their primitive chemical propulsion systems have been safely disabled to prevent accidental collisions with hegemony vessels. Several of their communication satellites have been relocated to optimal positions for enhanced signal clarity during the relocation process. The psychological impact on humanity was immediate and predictable. Human communication networks erupted with the kind of chaotic emotional responses that confirmed their developmental limitations: fear, anger, desperation, and confusional, the primitive emotional states that prevented younger species from thinking clearly about their circumstances. Ambassador Zelthera decided that a more comprehensive demonstration might help the humans accept their situation more quickly. She instructed her crew to prepare a cultural education broadcast that would help humanity understand their place in the galactic community. Activate historical archives, she commanded. Show them the Zephyrian relocation from 3 centuries ago. It should provide an excellent example of successful primitive species management. The broadcast showed peaceful scenes of the Zephyrians' transition from their chaotic homeworld to carefully managed reservation systems where they could develop at their own pace under hegemony guidance. What had once been a violent, fragmented civilization had become a model of primitive species, personified, peaceful, and grateful for the hegemony's benevolent intervention. The Zephyrians initially resisted relocation. As all primitive species do, Zelthera narrated as the images showed happy Zephyrian families in their new homes, but they quickly recognized the benefits of hegemony guidance. Today, their young ones receive proper education. Their resources are allocated efficiently, and their violent tendencies have been channeled into productive activities. She concluded the broadcast with gentle encouragement: humanity will follow a similar path. Your current anxiety is natural and temporary. Once relocation is complete, your species will begin the long journey toward actual civilization under the guidance of beings who have successfully navigated the challenges you now face. The human response was exactly what the hegemony's psychological profiles had predicted: desperate attempts at negotiation, emotional appeals for mercy, and pathetic offers of primitive trade agreements. Secretary General Santos even suggested that humanity could contribute to galactic civilization by sharing their unique perspectives and cultural diversity, the kind of naive self-importance that made primitive species psychology so predictable. As the second week of the 30-day deadline passed, Zelthera prepared her detailed reports for the Hegemony Council. Everything was proceeding according to standard protocols. Human resistance remained purely symbolic. Their military preparations were laughably inadequate, and their psychological responses followed predicted patterns exactly. Primitive species management proceeding nominally, she dictated to her official logs. Human population demonstrates expected emotional instability, but shows signs of eventual acceptance. Recommend standard relocation timeline with minimal security enhancement. This appears to be another textbook case of successful primitive species integration. What neither Zelthera nor any member of her crew noticed was that human primitive technology included quantum entanglement communication systems that had been monitoring hegemony transmissions for over 60 years. While the aliens cataloged Earth's resources and planned humanity's relocation, deep underground facilities across the planet were activating systems that the hegemony's advanced sensors couldn't detect because they operated on principles that galactic civilization had never discovered. The humans weren't preparing to fight the hegemony's technology. They were preparing to demonstrate that primitive and harmless weren't necessarily the same thing. The first sign that something had changed came on day 18 of the 30-day deadline. Science coordinator Vexani was conducting routine atmospheric analysis when her quantum sensors detected an anomaly that shouldn't have existed on a primitive world. "Ambassador," she announced, her harmonic frequency carrying notes of confusion rather than her usual scientific confidence. I'm detecting coordinated electromagnetic emissions from previously inactive locations across the planet. The patterns suggest organized technological activation on a global scale. Ambassador Zelthera moved to the sensor array, her crystalline form pulsing with mild interest. Primitive species often attempted last-minute technological displays. During relocation procedures, desperate efforts to demonstrate capabilities they thought might impress their superiors. It was endearing in its futility. Specify the nature of these emissions, she commanded, expecting to observe crude attempts at enhanced communications or perhaps primitive attempts at space-based weapons systems. That's the peculiar aspect, Vexani replied, her form brightening with the kind of academic puzzlement that indicated data that didn't fit expected parameters. The emissions aren't originating from known human technological installations. They're coming from underground facilities that our scans previously identified as geological formations. The main display materialized, showing Earth's surface with overlaid quantum signatures that revealed a startling truth across every continent, beneath mountains and deserts. Under major cities and remote wilderness areas, sophisticated technological installations were activating in perfect synchronization. The power signatures were unlike anything in the hegemony's databases, not the energy manipulation or exotic matter systems used by galactic civilization, but something entirely different. Security Coordinator Throlix joined the analysis, his harmonic voice carrying the first notes of actual concern rather than condescending amusement. Ambassador, these facilities were completely invisible to our scanning systems until they activated. The technological principles involved appear to operate outside our detection parameters. Impossible, Zelthera declared, her form brightening. With confident dismissal, human technology is limited to chemical reactions and basic atomic manipulation. They lack the fundamental scientific understanding necessary for sophisticated concealment systems. But even as she spoke, the evidence continued mounting. The underground installations were clearly sophisticated beyond anything humans should have been capable of constructing. More disturbing, they seemed to be interfacing with Earth's magnetic field and ionosphere in ways that suggested principles of physics the hegemony had never encountered. The communication array activated with an incoming transmission from Earth's surface. Secretary General Santos appeared on the display, but something was different about the human's demeanor. Gone was the desperate pleading and emotional instability that had characterized their previous communications. Instead, Santos displayed the kind of calm confidence that Zelthera associated with advanced species leadership. Ambassador Zelthera Santos began, her voice carrying none of the stress patterns that had previously marked human communications. Thank you for the additional time to consider your proposal. Humanity has reached a consensus regarding our response to your relocation offer. Excellent, Zelthera replied, expecting the inevitable acceptance that always followed primitive species' futile resistance phases. The hegemony is prepared to begin immediate transport operations. Your cooperation will make the transition much more efficient for all involved. Santos smiled with an expression that the translation matrix identified as confident rather than submissive. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Ambassador. Humanity has decided to decline your relocation offer. We'll be remaining on Earth. The silence that followed this statement stretched across several seconds as the hegemony crew processed what they had just heard. Primitive species didn't decline relocation offers from advanced civilizations. The concept was as incomprehensible as gravity flowing upward or energy dispersing into more concentrated forms. Young one Zelthera replied with the patient tone she used for particularly confused primitive beings. Perhaps your translation systems are malfunctioning. The hegemony doesn't make offers that can be declined. We provide guidance to primitive species for their own benefit and the greater good of galactic civilization. Our translation systems are functioning perfectly, Santos responded, her calm demeanor becoming almost unsettling in its confidence. As are our communication systems, our defensive installations, and our comprehensive understanding of hegemony technology and tactics. Dr. Sarah Kim stepped into view beside Santos, her appearance causing Vexani's form to flicker with surprise. The human female carried data tablets, displaying information that shouldn't have existed on a primitive, world-detailed schematics of hegemony vessel designs, tactical analyses of their standard operating procedures, and most impossibly, accurate translations of their harmonic language systems. Allow me to introduce myself properly, Dr. Kim said, her voice carrying technical terminology that made the translation matrices work harder than they had since arriving at Earth. I'm Dr. Sarah Kim, Director of Earth Xenotechnology Research Division and Humanity's Chief Liaison for our first official contact with galactic civilization. Zelthera's crew exchanged harmonic frequencies that conveyed growing bewilderment. Xenotechnology Research Division implied organized study of alien science, which was impossible for a species that had never encountered other intelligent life. The very concept suggested preparation for contact that should have been beyond primitive species capabilities. Dr. Kim Zelthera began carefully. Your species has had no previous contact with galactic civilization. How could you possibly have developed xenotechnology research capabilities? Dr. Kim activated a holographic display that materialized from devices. The hegemony sensors hadn't detected until they became active. The technology wasn't based on energy manipulation or exotic matrit, was something else entirely, operating on principles that seemed to bypass conventional physics altogether. We've been monitoring galactic communications for 67 years, Dr. Kim announced matter-of-factly. Ever since our first quantum entanglement experiments accidentally intercepted hegemony transmission networks, we've had plenty of time to study your language, analyze your technology, and prepare for the day you discovered Earth. The implications of this statement sent shockwaves through the hegemony crew. Quantum entanglement communication was considered impossible without exotic matter, manipulation a technology that primitive species couldn't develop. Yet the humans were claiming they had achieved it through entirely different methods. Your quantum entanglement experiments are theoretical impossibilities for your technological level. Vexani protested, her harmonic voice carrying notes of academic distress. The energy requirements alone exceed your planetary output by factors of magnitude. That's because you assume quantum entanglement requires energy manipulation. Dr. Kim replied with the patient tone of a teacher, explaining basic concepts to slow students. We discovered that quantum states can be synchronized through mathematical relationships rather than energy input. It's much more efficient than your approach, though apparently less obvious to civilizations that focused on energy-based solutions. Security Coordinator Thralix attempted to scan the human installations with more sophisticated detection arrays, but the results only deepened the mystery. The underground facilities operated on technological principles that his sensors couldn't properly analyze, not because they were too primitive, but because they were fundamentally different from anything in hegemony experience. Ambassador, he reported with growing concern, I'm detecting energy signatures that don't conform to any known technological applications. The humans appear to have developed science based on principles our databases don't recognize. Dr. Kim continued her presentation with the confidence of someone who had spent decades preparing for this moment. Your hegemony focused on manipulating energy and exotic matter to achieve technological advancement. Very impressive, but also very predictable. Humanity took a different approach. We learned to manipulate quantum probability, biological systems, and mathematical relationships directly. She gestured to her holographic display, which now showed detailed analyses of hegemony vessels that revealed weaknesses their designers had never considered. Your energy shields are extremely effective against energy-based attacks and exotic matter manipulation, but they're quite vulnerable to quantum probability cascades, biological agents designed to target crystalline matrices and kinetic systems that operate outside conventional physics. Ambassador Zelthera found herself experiencing something she hadn't felt in centuries of dealing with primitive species: uncertainty. The humans were demonstrating capabilities that contradicted everything the hegemony knew about technological development. Worse, they were doing so with the kind of calm competence that suggested extensive preparation rather than desperate improvisation. You're claiming that your species has developed alternative scientific principles, she asked, her harmonic voice carrying notes of barely concealed disbelief. Not alternative, Dr. Kim corrected, complementary. While galactic civilization pursued energy manipulation, humanity explored quantum mechanics, nanotechnology, biological engineering, and mathematical manipulation of reality itself. We're not more advanced than you were. differently advanced. Secretary General Santos stepped forward again, her demeanor now carrying the authority of someone representing a civilization that was far more capable than it appeared. Ambassador, humanity appreciates the hegemony's offer of guidance, but we've been developing quite well on our own. We'd prefer to remain on Earth and explore the possibility of joining galactic civilization as equals rather than relocated primitives. The word equals sent harmonic shockwaves through the hegemony crew. Primitive species didn't become equals, they underwent centuries of guided development under advanced supervision. The very concept challenged fundamental assumptions about how galactic civilization functioned. Dr. Kim Zelthara said carefully, "Even if your species has developed unusual technological approaches, you still lack the unified planetary government, sustainable resource management, and psychological stability necessary for galactic citizenship." Dr. Kim's smile carried the kind of confidence that made Zelthara's crystalline form flicker with unease. "Actually, Ambassador, we achieved planetary government unification 43 hours ago. The external threat you represent has been remarkably effective at resolving our political differences. As for psychological stability and resource management, well, I think you'll find that humanity's approach to problem solving is quite stable, just not in ways you might expect." The communication ended, leaving the hegemony crew in stunned silence. Everything they thought they knew about primitive species development had just been challenged by beings who should have been incapable of such sophistication. "Ambassador?" Navigation Coordinator Luxera reported with obvious confusion. "Our detection systems are now registering previously invisible installations throughout the Sol system. The humans appear to have constructed defensive positions using technology that operates outside our sensor parameters." Zelthara stared at the display showing Earth, her mind struggling to process the implications of what they had discovered. Humanity wasn't a primitive species that needed guidance. They were a technological civilization that had developed along completely different lines than galactic norm. Worse, they had been watching and preparing for contact for over 60 years. "Initiate comprehensive threat assessment protocols," she commanded, her harmonic voice carrying the first notes of genuine concern she had felt since arriving at Earth. "It appears that our initial evaluation of this species may have been incomplete." Ambassador Zelthara's confidence began cracking like overstressed crystal when the first wave of human primitive technology struck her fleet. It started with something impossible there. Quantum sensors detected incoming objects that registered as both present and absent simultaneously, existing in probability states that violated fundamental laws of physics. "Incoming projectiles," Security Coordinator Thralex announced, his harmonic voice carrying notes of professional confusion. "Trajectory analysis impossible. The objects appear to be following multiple flight paths simultaneously until the moment of impact." "Activate defensive barriers," Zelthara commanded, her crystalline form pulsing with the confident authority of someone protected by technology that had never failed against primitive weapons. "Chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles cannot penetrate hegemony energy shields." The objects struck their energy barriers and did exactly what every primitive weapon in galactic history had done. They bounced off harmlessly. For a moment, Zelthara felt her superiority reasserted. Then the real attack began. Ambassador Vexani reported with growing alarm, "The projectiles aren't designed to penetrate our shields. They're releasing something into the energy matrices themselves." The something turned out to be microscopic machines that shouldn't have been able to exist. Nanoscale constructs that treated energy barriers like solid matter, crawling through the quantum fields that formed their defensive systems and rewriting the fundamental equations that made those shields function. Within minutes, barriers that could deflect stellar plasma were dissolving like morning mist. "Impossible," Zelthara broadcast to her fleet. "Energy manipulation technology cannot be affected by mechanical systems. The principles are incompatible." Dr. Kim's voice crackled through their communication array, her tone carrying the patience of someone explaining obvious facts to confused children. "That's your first mistake, Ambassador. You assume that mechanical systems and energy manipulation are separate technologies. We learned to build machines that exist in quantum probability states, making them both mechanical and energetic simultaneously. The second wave of attacks came from directions that their sensors couldn't track. Not because the weapons were moving too fast, but because they were approaching through folded spacetime using mathematics that treated distance as a variable, rather than a constant. Human vessels emerged from what appeared to be empty space, their designs based on principles that made hegemony engineers' crystalline matrices hurt to contemplate. "Fleet status report," Zelthera demanded as proximity alarms shrieked through her ship's harmonic atmosphere. 17 vessels compromised, Throlix replied, his security protocols struggling to classify threats that operated outside known tactical parameters. Human weapons systems appear to target our technological advantages specifically. They're not trying to match our capabilities. They're exploiting weaknesses we never knew existed. The human ships were aesthetic nightmares. By galactic standards, crude metal constructs that looked like they had been assembled from industrial debris. But their weapon systems demonstrated sophistication that challenged fundamental assumptions about technological development. Where hegemony science had perfected energy manipulation, humans had apparently mastered reality manipulation. Incoming transmission from Human Command, Navigation Coordinator Luxera announced Secretary General Santos appeared on their display, but she was no longer speaking from Earth's surface. The background showed what appeared to be a military command center that shouldn't have existed, sophisticated beyond anything primitive species could construct, yet clearly human in its chaotic, efficient design. Ambassador Zelthera Santos said with calm authority, "Humanity appreciates your demonstration of hegemony military capabilities. Impressive energy manipulation technology? Really? Now let us show you what we learned while you were busy perfecting techniques we abandoned as dead ends." Dead ends. Zelthera's harmonic voice carried overtones of outraged disbelief. Hegemony technology represents millions of years of advancement across thousands of civilizations. Your species has existed for barely 50,000 years. Dr. Kim stepped into view beside Santos, her hands moving across holographic interfaces that operated through principles the hegemony's scientists couldn't identify. Exactly our point. You've all been thinking about technology the same way for millions of years. Sometimes the advantage goes to the species crazy enough to try approaches that obviously won't work. The third wave of human attacks targeted their most fundamental assumption that hegemony vessel designs represented optimal engineering solutions. Human weapons ignored their advanced hull materials and sophisticated defensive systems entirely, instead attacking the mathematical relationships that held their ships together. Crystalline matrices that had been perfected over millennia began experiencing structural failures as their quantum bonds were redefined at the subatomic level. How were they doing this? Vexani demanded, her scientific protocols overwhelmed. By data that contradicted everything she understood about physics. Matter cannot be restructured at the quantum level without massive energy expenditure. That's because you're thinking about it backwards, Dr. Kim replied through their communication link. You try to force matter to change by applying energy. We learned to change the mathematical descriptions of matter itself, then let reality adjust to match the new equations. Much more efficient. Security Coordinator, Throlix, attempted to target the human vessels with their most advanced weapons. Systems energy beams that could vaporize asteroids and gravity manipulation fields that could crush planets. The attacks reached their targets with perfect accuracy and absolute futility. Human ships didn't try to deflect or absorb the energy, they simply redefined their physical properties to make the attacks irrelevant. They're treating our weapons like environmental hazards, Throlix reported with professional bewilderment. Energy beams pass through their hulls without effect. Gravitational fields are redirected around their vessels. It's as if they've convinced reality itself that our attacks aren't actually dangerous. That's exactly what we did, confirmed Dr. Kim. Quantum mechanics includes observer effects reality changes based on how it's observed and described. We learn to observe our own ships in ways that make them immune to energy-based attacks. Your weapons are still perfectly functional, but our vessels exist in probability states where those weapons simply aren't effective. The fourth wave revealed humanity's most disturbing advantage. They understood hegemony psychology better than the hegemony understood human capabilities. Their attacks targeted not just technological weaknesses, but psychological vulnerabilities that galactic civilization had never needed to address. Human communication systems began broadcasting messages directly into hegemony neural networks. using mathematical harmonies that bypassed their conscious defenses and spoke to their subconscious fears. For beings accustomed to absolute technological superiority, the experience of facing opponents who treated their most advanced weapons as minor inconveniences was psychologically devastating. Ambassador Luxera reported with harmonic frequencies that indicated approaching panic. The humans are broadcasting what appear to be entertainment programs directly into our consciousness. Stories about primitive species defeating advanced civilizations through unconventional methods. Zephyra's crystalline form flickered as she processed this information. They're using psychological warfare. More than that, Dr. Kim's voice carried through their neural networks with impossible clarity. We're helping you understand that advanced and superior aren't the same thing. Your technology is incredibly sophisticated, but it's also incredibly predictable. You've all been solving the same problems the same ways for so long that you've forgotten there might be other approaches. The final attack wave targeted the foundation of hegemony confidence itself. Human vessels began demonstrating capabilities that shouldn't have been possible. Ships that existed in multiple locations simultaneously. Weapons that fired backwards through time to hit targets before they were launched, and defensive systems that protected against attacks by convincing the universe that those attacks had never been fired in the first place. Status of all hegemony vessels. Zephyra commanded her harmonic voice, carrying notes of something she had never experienced before. Genuine fear. 43 ships disabled or destroyed, Thralex reported. Remaining vessels are experiencing systematic failures as human weapons continue to redefine the physical laws governing our technology. Our energy shields are dissolving. Our weapon systems are being convinced they don't exist. And our hull materials are forgetting how to maintain structural integrity. Dr. Kim appeared on their main display one final time, her expression carrying the kind of sad sympathy usually reserved for teaching difficult lessons to stubborn children. Ambassador, we tried to warn you through our initial communications. Humanity isn't primitive or different. You've spent millions of years perfecting one approach to technology while we spent decades exploring approaches you never considered. This is impossible, Zephyra insisted, her crystalline form dimming as her confidence cracked under the weight of evidence. Primitive species cannot defeat advanced civilizations. The mathematics don't support such outcomes. That's your problem right there, Dr. Kim replied gently. You're using the wrong mathematics. Reality is much more flexible than galactic civilization believes. Matter, energy, space, and time are all just variables in equations that can be rewritten if you understand the underlying principles. Secretary General Santos stepped forward with the authority of someone representing a civilization that had just redefined galactic power structures. Ambassador, humanity doesn't want to destroy the hegemony. We want to join galactic civilization as equals. But that requires the hegemony to accept that primitive doesn't mean inferior, it just means different. As the last of her fleets, defensive systems failed under assault from weapons that operated outside conventional physics. Zephyra faced a reality that challenged everything she understood about technological advancement. Humanity hadn't achieved superiority through better energy manipulation or more sophisticated matter control. They had achieved superiority by refusing to accept that there was only one way to approach scientific problems, while galactic civilization had spent millions of years perfecting techniques that humanity's primitive science had rendered obsolete in decades. So what do you want from us? Zephyra asked, her harmonic voice carrying the defeat of a civilization that had just discovered. It wasn't as advanced as it believed. Dr. Kim's smile carried genuine warmth rather than triumphant superiority. We want you to learn, Ambassador, just like we've been learning from monitoring your communications. The universe is big enough for multiple approaches to technology, multiple solutions to problems, and multiple definitions of advancement. And if the hegemony refuses to accept this perspective, then you'll discover that primitive species can be remarkably effective teachers. Santos replied with the calm confidence of someone whose civilization had just proven that different didn't mean inferior. The choice is yours, Ambassador. But either way, humanity is staying on Earth. The human fleet emerged from hidden installations across the Sol system like a technological revelation that redefined what advanced warfare could look like. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of the UES paradigm shift, watching hegemony vessels struggle against weapons that treated their million-year-old advantages as amusing inconveniences. Operation Teachable Moment is proceeding ahead of schedule, reported Captain Torres from the tactical station, her voice carrying professional satisfaction. Mixed with amazement at what human ingenuity had accomplished in 6 decades of secret preparation, hegemony forces are down to 37% operational capacity and falling. Dr. Kim's voice crackled through the fleet communication network from her position aboard the command vessel. Unconventional wisdom. Remember, people were not trying to exterminate them. We're demonstrating that primitive doesn't mean helpless. The human ships themselves embodied everything that made galactic civilization. Underestimate Earth, where hegemony vessels were elegant crystalline constructs that manipulated exotic energies with aesthetic perfection. Human designs looked like someone had welded industrial equipment together with complete disregard for conventional engineering principles. The UES Murphy's Law resembled a flying scrapyard, its hull constructed from materials that shouldn't have been able to maintain structural integrity under combat conditions. But its weapon systems operated on principles that made hegemony defensive technology as obsolete as stone axes against modern warfare. Firing quantum cascade torpedoes, announced Commander Singh from his position aboard the deliberately intimidating U.S. Sod's Law. Target, hegemony flagship luminary of progress. Impact in 3.2.1. The torpedoes struck Ambassador Zelthera's vessel and performed exactly as designed. They convinced the ship's energy shields that they didn't exist, persuaded its hull materials that they were actually transparent gas, and informed its structural integrity fields that gravity was now flowing in 17 different directions. Simultaneously, the luminary of progress didn't explode in the dramatic fashion typical of space combat. Instead, it experienced what human engineers cheerfully called aggressive reconstruction. Its crystalline structure reorganized itself into configurations that were mathematically beautiful, but completely non-functional as a starship. Ambassador Zelthera. Admiral Chen's voice carried across communication channels with the calm professionalism of someone delivering a prepared lesson. You're experiencing humanity's approach to conflict resolution. We don't destroy our opponents, we convince them that continuing to fight is mathematically irrational. Zelthera's response came through her ship's emergency communication systems, her harmonic voice carrying frequencies that indicated psychological shock approaching systemic breakdown. This is impossible. Your weapons are violating fundamental principles of physics. Matter cannot be restructured through mathematical persuasion. That's where you're wrong, Dr. Kim interjected from her mobile laboratory aboard the Paradigm Shift. Physics isn't a set of unbreakable laws, it's a collection of observed relationships that can be modified if you understand the underlying mathematics. We're not breaking physics, we're updating its operating system. The second phase of Operation Teachable Moment targeted the psychological foundations of hegemony superiority. Human vessels began broadcasting what they called educational entertainment, detailed explanations of how their impossible technology actually worked, delivered through quantum harmonics that bypassed conscious resistance and spoke directly to their target's intellectual curiosity. Science coordinator Vexani found herself involuntarily fascinated by human explanations of probability manipulation technology. Her crystalline consciousness evolved for processing complex scientific data. Couldn't resist analyzing the mathematical proofs that demonstrated how reality could be treated as a programmable system rather than a fixed framework. They're teaching us, she reported to Zelthera with harmonic frequencies that indicated academic excitement overriding tactical awareness. Their weapons aren't just attacking our ships, they're showing us scientific principles that our civilization never discovered. This is the most revolutionary technological advancement in galactic history. Revolutionary or not, Security Coordinator Thralix interrupted with professional focus. We're still losing every engagement. Human vessels are treating our most advanced weapons like environmental background noise. The EU's perverse incentive demonstrated this point by allowing a hegemony energy beam capable of vaporizing small moons to pass completely through its hull without effect. The ship's quantum state had been adjusted to exist in a probability configuration, where energy-based attacks simply weren't relevant to its continued existence. How is this possible? Thralex demanded through emergency communication channels. Captain Martinez, aboard the perverse incentive, activated his external speakers with obvious satisfaction. Quantum observer effects. Reality changes based on how it's observed and measured. We programmed our ships to observe themselves as immune to energy weapons, then let the universe adjust accordingly. Your beam is still perfectly functional. It just happens to exist in a reality where our ship isn't there to be hit by it. The third phase revealed humanity's most psychologically devastating advantage. They understood hegemony technology better than the hegemony understood human capabilities. Human engineers had spent 60 years analyzing intercepted communications, been considered because they required thinking outside conventional scientific frameworks. Initiating technological demonstration sequence, Admiral Chen announced to her fleet. Show them what 6 decades of studying their advanced science actually taught us. The human vessel U.S. Dunning-Kruger effect approached the hegemony battleship. Crystalline perfection, and began what could only be described as aggressive technical assistance. Using quantum manipulation fields that the hegemony had deemed impossible without exotic matter, human engineers began improving the alien vessel's design in real time. Energy efficiency increased by 400%. Computational speed improved by factors that required new mathematical notation. Defensive capabilities expanded beyond anything in hegemony databases. But the modifications also included what humans called educational features, systems that provided detailed explanations of how the improvements worked and why conventional galactic technology had never achieved such results. Read ... helping. U.S. asked Commander Vixtel of the crystalline perfection, her harmonic voice carrying confusion that bordered on existential crisis. We're demonstrating the difference between advanced and superior, replied Dr. Kim through direct quantum interface with the modified ship's systems. Your technology is incredibly advanced, sophisticated, beyond anything we could have developed, using your methods, but advancement isn't the same as optimization. You perfected one approach to science while never exploring alternatives that might be more effective. The fourth phase targeted the strategic foundation of hegemony operations. Human vessels began demonstrating that their primitive technology included capabilities that galactic civilization had never imagined: faster than light travel without exotic matter, communication systems that operated backwards through time, and manufacturing techniques that produced materials by convincing quantum vacuum to spontaneously organize itself into useful configurations. The UES aggressive teleportation, a technique that moved ships by convincing reality that they had always been in their new location rather than their original position. The psychological impact on beings accustomed to predictable physics was devastating. Impossible. Zephyra broadcast across all frequencies. Transportation requires energy expenditure proportional to mass and distance. Your vessel cannot simply relocate itself through mathematical redefinition. Watch and learn, Admiral Chen replied through quantum harmonics that carried educational subroutines directly into hegemony consciousness. Energy-based transportation assumes that matter and energy are separate phenomena. We learned that they're different manifestations of the same underlying mathematical relationships. Change the math, change the reality. The final phase of the operation revealed humanity's ultimate strategic advantage. They had never intended to fight a conventional war. Instead, they had designed a comprehensive educational program disguised as military conflict, a systematic demonstration that galactic civilization's assumptions about technological development were fundamentally incomplete. Status report. From all human vessels, Admiral Chen commanded as the lesson reached its conclusion. UES cognitive dissonance reporting. Hegemony forces are experiencing systematic paradigm failure, came the response from Captain Patel. Their technology remains functional, but their understanding of how technology should work has been completely undermined. UES paradigm shift reporting. Educational objectives achieved, added Dr. Kim. Hegemony personnel are demonstrating accelerated learning curves as they process alternative approaches to scientific methodology. Admiral Chen activated fleet-wide communications, addressing both human and hegemony forces simultaneously. This concludes the combat demonstration phase of first contact proceedings. Hegemony vessels, you have experienced approximately % of humanity's defensive capabilities. Your ships remain functional because we chose to educate rather than eliminate. She paused, allowing the implications to settle into crystalline consciousness that had never experienced technological inferiority before continuing. Ambassador Zelthera, humanity offers the hegemony a choice. You can continue operating under the assumption that millions of years of conventional advancement make you superior to species who approach science differently, or you can accept that the universe contains more approaches to technology than your civilization ever explored. And if we choose to continue considering ourselves superior, Zelthera asked, her harmonic voice carrying defeat disguised as diplomatic inquiry. Dr. Kim's response carried the gentle authority of someone who had just redefined galactic power structures through superior understanding rather than superior firepower. Then you'll discover that primitive species can be remarkably effective teachers. Ambassador, the universe is much larger and stranger than galactic civilization believes. We're offering to show you just how much you haven't learned. Yet, the silence that followed carried across the Sol system like a suspended moment of historical significance. The pause between galactic civilizations' confident assumptions about primitive species and their new understanding that different approaches to science could render millions of years of advancement effectively obsolete. What exactly are you proposing? Zelthera finally asked. Admiral Chen smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose species had just proven that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest strategic advantage possible. Partnership, Ambassador. Real partnership between equals who happen to have developed along different technological paths. We have a lot to learn from each other, if you're willing to accept that learning flows in both directions. 3 months after Operation Teachable Moment, the Galactic Council chambers had never hosted a more revolutionary session. Representatives from 14,000 advanced civilizations gathered to witness what historians would later call the Great Recalibration, the moment galactic civilization acknowledged that their understanding of technological development had been catastrophically incomplete. Ambassador Zelthara materialized at the central speaking platform, her crystalline form bearing the stress fractures that had become permanent reminders of humanity's devastating education in alternative physics. Her harmonic voice carried frequencies that the entire assembly recognized as profound humility, tone that had never before been heard from a species reporting on primitive world management. Honored representatives, she began, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors that indicated academic submission rather than diplomatic authority. The hegemony's mission to the Sol system has resulted in the most significant paradigm shift in galactic scientific history. Humanity is not a primitive species requiring guidance. They are a technological civilization that has achieved advancement through principles that our combined knowledge bases never anticipated. The Assembly's response was immediate and chaotic. Representatives from the ancient builders of species that had achieved galactic prominence, when the current galaxy was still young, projected harmonic disbelief that resonated through the council chambers like technological earthquake tremors. Impossible, transmitted Elder Architect Kethmorn. Their energy form, consciousness pulsing with the authority of beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of thousands of civilizations. No species achieves interstellar capability without following established technological progression patterns. Energy manipulation, exotic matter control, and gravitational engineering are prerequisites for advanced civilization. That assumption, Zelthera replied with the weary patience of someone whose fundamental beliefs had been systematically dismantled, is exactly what humanity used against us. They achieved interstellar capability through quantum probability manipulation, reality mathematics, and technologies that treat our prerequisites as optional suggestions rather than natural laws. The holographic display activated, showing footage from the Sol system engagement that made the assembled representatives experience something their species had never felt before: technological inadequacy. Human vessels moved through space-time like thoughts made manifest. Their weapons convinced reality to operate according to principles that existed nowhere in galactic databases. Observe, Zelthera narrated as the footage showed human ships existing in multiple locations simultaneously, while their weapons fired backwards, through time to hit targets before they were launched. Humanity doesn't manipulate energy or exotic matter. They manipulate the mathematical relationships that define reality itself, then allow the universe to adjust accordingly. The quantum collective beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form millions of years ago projected their analysis directly into the Council's shared consciousness. Their mathematical models, capable of processing reality at quantum scales, confirmed what no one wanted to believe. Human technological approaches operate outside established scientific frameworks. The collective transmitted with harmonic frequencies that carried existential uncertainty. Their methods suggest alternative paths to advancement that our combined civilizations never explored. They have achieved technological capabilities equivalent to our own through completely different scientific principles. Dr. Sarah Kim materialized in the council chambers through human transportation technology that made the assembly's most sophisticated beings recalibrate their understanding of what primitive could accomplish. Her appearance was deliberate political theater. She arrived alone, unarmed, and completely confident in the face of 14,000 advanced civilizations that had considered her species barely sentient just months before. Honored representatives, Dr. Kim began with the calm authority of someone whose species had just redefined galactic power structures. Humanity appreciates the invitation to address the Council. We understand that our technological approaches have created some uncertainty about established scientific assumptions. The understatement generated harmonic frequencies that indicated barely controlled hysteria. Among representatives who had built their civilizations on principles that humanity had rendered obsolete in decades, Dr. Kim projected the voice of Supreme Coordinator Velfax from the Machine Consensus, a collective of artificial intelligences that had achieved consciousness before organic life evolved beyond single-celled organisms. Explain how your species developed technological capabilities that contradict fundamental principles of physics without following established advancement protocols. Dr. Kim activated holographic displays that demonstrated human scientific methodology with terrifying clarity. You assumed that energy manipulation and exotic matter control were the only paths to advanced technology. We discovered that reality is much more flexible than that assumption suggests. Mathematics isn't just a tool for describing the universe, it's the programming language the universe uses to define itself. She gestured to equations that made the Council's most advanced scientists experience cognitive dissonance. While galactic civilization spent millions of years perfecting techniques for manipulating what exists, humanity learned to modify the equations that determine what can exist. We didn't build better energy weapons, we convinced reality that energy weapons aren't effective against our vessels. The ancient builders projected their confusion through gravitational fluctuations that made the council chambers ring like struck bells. You're claiming that mathematical redefinition can supersede physical laws. I'm demonstrating that physical laws are mathematical relationships that can be updated if you understand the underlying code. Dr. Kim replied with the patience of someone who had spent months explaining basic concepts to beings who considered themselves the galaxy's most advanced minds. Energy, matter, space, and time are variables in equations that can be rewritten. Your civilizations mastered manipulating those variables. We learned to modify the equations themselves. Secretary General Santos joined the presentation through quantum transportation that treated interstellar distance as a user interface rather than a physical barrier. Her presence represented something unprecedented in galactic history: primitive world's leadership, addressing the Council as equals rather than supplicants. The question facing this assembly, Santos announced with diplomatic authority, that made 14,000 advanced civilizations pay attention to a species they had dismissed as children, is whether galactic civilization can accept that advancement comes in multiple forms. Humanity doesn't want to replace your approaches to technology. We want to demonstrate that there are alternatives you never explored. Elder architect Kethmern's energy form consciousness pulsed with the kind of existential uncertainty that came from discovering that millions of years of advancement might have been following unnecessarily limited paths. What does humanity propose? Dr. Kim's response carried implications that would reshape galactic civilization for millennia. Scientific exchange programs, technology sharing agreements, collaborative research into approaches that combine your mastery of energy manipulation with our understanding of reality programming. The universe is vast enough for multiple solutions to the same problems. And if certain civilizations refuse to accept that primitive species can achieve technological parity, asked Supreme Coordinator Velfax with mechanical precision that barely concealed artificial anxiety. Santos smiled with the confidence of someone whose species had just proven that being underestimated was sometimes the greatest strategic advantage possible. Then they'll continue operating under incomplete assumptions about how technology works, while other civilizations explore approaches that make those assumptions obsolete. The council chambers fell silent as 14,000 advanced civilizations processed the implications of humanity's offer. They could maintain their belief in their own superiority and risk technological stagnation, or they could acknowledge that primitive species might have discovered principles that galactic science had never imagined. There is precedent for this situation, projected the voice of archival consciousness, prima collective intelligence that maintained the complete historical records of galactic civilization. Species that refuse to adapt to new technological paradigms typically experience gradual irrelevance as more flexible civilizations incorporate superior approaches. The vote, when it came, was unprecedented in council history. For the first time since the establishment of galactic civilization, the Assembly voted to admit a species as technological equals despite their apparent primitiveness. The margin was narrow: 7,003 in favor, 6,997 opposed, but the precedent was established. Humanity is hereby granted full membership in galactic civilization, announced Council Prime, their harmonic voice carrying frequencies that indicated historical significance. All previous classifications of Sol system as primitive territory are rescinded. Earth is acknowledged as the homeworld of a technologically advanced species with unique approaches to scientific development. Dr. Kim's response would be quoted in galactic history texts for the next million years. Thank you. We look forward to showing you what else the universe can do when you stop assuming there's only one way to approach scientific problems. 6 months later, the first joint human hegemony research station activated in orbit around Jupiter. Its hybrid technology combining galactic energy manipulation techniques with human reality programming systems. The resulting capabilities exceeded anything either civilization had achieved independently, proving that different approaches to science could be synergistic rather than competitive. But the real revolution was already spreading beyond the Sol system. Across the galaxy, species that had been classified as primitive began receiving covert transmissions from Earth-detailed technical specifications, mathematical proofs, and, most importantly, encouragement to explore scientific approaches that galactic civilization had dismissed as impossible. The message was always the same. They called us primitive too. Want to show them how wrong they are? Within a decade over, 300 primitive species had achieved technological breakthroughs that challenged galactic assumptions about advancement. Some mastered biological engineering that made living veterans. Others developed consciousness-based technology that treated thoughts as programmable matter. A few discovered approaches to physics that made faster-than-light travel look like a quaint historical curiosity. Ambassador Zelthera, now serving as the hegemony's liaison to the new coalition of alternative sciences, stood in her crystalline office overlooking the bustling diversity of the first truly integrated galactic research facility. Through her viewports, she could see human engineers collaborating with energy beings on projects that wouldn't have been imaginable before first contact. Final report on the Sol System initiative she dictated to her harmonic recording systems, her voice carrying frequencies that indicated profound satisfaction mixed with philosophical humility. Initial assessment: catastrophic failure of standard primitive species protocols. Revised assessment: most successful educational exchange in galactic history. She paused, watching human children play with hegemony younglings in gravitational fields that had been modified to allow three-dimensional tag games that treated up and down as suggestions rather than requirements. Recommendation for future primitive world contact: abandon assumptions about technological limitations. The universe appears to contain more approaches to science than our civilization ever imagined. Primitiveness may simply indicate different, rather than inferior development paths. Her final entry would become required reading at every galactic's diplomatic academy. Humanity taught us that calling a species primitive says more about the limitations of our own understanding than it does about their capabilities. Sometimes the greatest advances come from those who are too naive to know what's supposed to be impossible. Outside her office, the galaxy continued its new trajectory toward a future where different didn't mean inferior, where primitive could indicate revolutionary, and where the most important scientific advances came from species brave enough to ignore conventional wisdom. about what advanced civilization should look like. The revolution that began with humanity's refusal to accept relocation had become the foundation for a galactic renaissance based on a simple principle. There are always more ways to solve problems than the methods you've already discovered. And somewhere in the deep space between stars, automated beacons continued broadcasting. Humanity's message to species that galactic civilization had written off as too primitive to matter. Want to show them how wrong they are?